A puppy visits its dying mother, then the unthinkable happens. At first, it looks like nothing more than heartbreak, a tiny pup clinging to its last moments with the only family it has left. But in the shadows, something darker is waiting. When a quiet man steps in to help, he uncovers a cruel secret no one was meant to see. Suddenly, he's not just fighting to save one fragile life. He's standing against a powerful force that will stop at nothing to stay hidden. Every choice he makes pulls him deeper into danger, and every truth he uncovers is more shocking than the last. What really happened to the mother? And how far will he go when protecting this puppy means risking everything? This channel isn't just about stories. It's about holding on to what still matters: empathy, truth, love, and the courage to care. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the outskirts of town as Landon Krell trudged home from another exhausting day at the veterinary clinic. His work clothes were covered in the usual mix of animal hair and antiseptic spray, his weathered hands bearing fresh scratches from a particularly feisty cat. He was looking forward to a quiet evening when a pitiful whimper caught his attention. There, huddled against a scraggly bush, was one of the smallest puppies he had ever seen. The creature's ribs showed through its mottled coat, and its eyes held a desperate plea that tugged at Landon's heart. Without hesitation, he knelt down, speaking, in the gentle tone he reserved for scared animals. "Hey there, little one. It's okay. I won't hurt you." The puppy cowered at first, but seemed to sense Landon's genuine concern. After a few tense moments, it crept forward, nose twitching as it caught the familiar scents of other animals on Landon's clothes. When Landon carefully scooped up the trembling pup, he could feel every bone beneath its skin. "You're coming home with me," he murmured, cradling the puppy inside his jacket. At the clinic, they used numbered tags to identify strays, and this one would have been Z4. "I'll call you Z," he decided, earning a tiny lick on his hand. Over the next few weeks, Landon nursed Z back to health. The pup proved to be as resilient as he was affectionate, quickly gaining weight and strength. Their evening walks became the highlight of Landon's day, with Z trotting happily beside him, tail wagging. But Landon couldn't help noticing how his companion's demeanor would change whenever they approached the sprawling Caldwell Ranch. The massive property lay like a shadow at the edge of town, its barbed wire fences and no trespassing signs making it clear that visitors weren't welcome. Z would grow visibly agitated, pulling at his leash and whining with unusual intensity. At first, Landon attributed it to the scent of the Caldwell's cattle, but something about the pup's behavior seemed more urgent, more distressed. One particularly quiet night, with a full moon hanging low in the sky, Z's anxiety reached a fever pitch. Instead of their usual route, the puppy strained against his leash with such determination that Landon found himself following, despite his better judgment. They approached the Caldwell property line, Z leading them along the fence with singular purpose. "What is it, boy?" Landon whispered, his heart beginning to race. He knew they shouldn't be here. The Caldwells were powerful people who didn't take kindly to trespassers, but Z's insistence was impossible to ignore. The puppy led him to a gap in the fence, barely visible in the moonlight. Beyond it lay a small hollow, hidden from the main road by thick brush. Z squeezed through the opening, and Landon, after a moment's hesitation, followed. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. There, lying in the hollow, was a dog that could only be Z's mother. Her coat matched his mottled pattern, but where Z was now healthy and strong, she was terribly thin, her breathing shallow and labored. Around her lay evidence of something sinister, scattered pieces of meat that carried a sickly sweet smell Landon recognized from his veterinary training. Poison. "Oh, God," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside the dying animal. Z pressed against his mother's side, whimpering softly, while Landon's mind raced through his options. He could try to carry her out, get her to the clinic, but one look at her condition told him it was too late. The poison had done its work. The mother dog's eyes met his, filled with a pain that went beyond physical suffering. Landon stayed with her, gently stroking her head as her breathing grew more labored. Z huddled close, as if understanding these were his mother's final moments. The reality of what he had discovered settled over Landon like a heavy weight. This wasn't a random occurrence. The carefully placed poisoned meat suggested deliberate cruelty. But taking action meant challenging the Caldwells, something few in town dared to do. As the mother dog took her last breath, Landon felt something shift inside him. His usual quiet acceptance of the world's injustices crumbled in the face of this needless death. Z pressed against his leg, trembling, and Landon realized that this small, brave puppy had led him here for a reason. "I'm so sorry, boy," he whispered, picking up Z and holding him close. "But we're not going to let this go. I promise you that." Looking down at the deceased mother dog, Landon knew he had stumbled onto something darker than he could have imagined. The Caldwell Ranch had always cast a long shadow over the town, but now that shadow held secrets that demanded to be brought into the light. His hands shook as he took out his phone and began documenting the scene, knowing that what he was about to do could change everything. The moon cast stark shadows across the hollow as Landon worked, his quiet determination matching the solemn silence of the night. This lonely spot on the edge of forbidden land had become the starting point of something much bigger than himself, all because a small, starving puppy had trusted him enough to show him the truth. The night air hung heavy with an unsettling stillness as Landon crept along the edge of the Caldwell property. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping low across the ground to avoid detection. The memory of the dying mother dog drove him forward, even as his conscience screamed about the foolishness of trespassing on Caldwell land. Every snap of a twig under his boots made his heart jump. The ranch was notorious in their small town. The Caldwells didn't take kindly to intruders. But the thought of that poor creature suffering alone in the darkness outweighed his fear. Landon checked his phone. 11:15 at night. He had waited until well after dark, watching the ranch house lights go out one by one. His palms were sweaty as he gripped his small digital camera, ready to document whatever he might find. The fence line came into view, and Landon's stomach churned at what he saw in his flashlight beam. Small chunks of meat lay scattered every 20 feet or so along the property border. At first glance, they looked like ordinary scraps, but something about their careful placement seemed deliberate. Pulling on a latex glove from his veterinary kit, Landon carefully picked up one of the meat pieces. The sickly sweet smell that hit his nostrils made him recoil. He had smelled this before at the clinic. Rat poison. His hands trembled as he sealed the evidence in a small plastic bag. Those monsters, he whispered, his voice tight with anger. This wasn't just negligence or indifference to suffering. This was calculated cruelty. Moving deeper into the property, Landon followed the trail of poisoned bait. His camera clicked quietly as he documented each piece, making sure to capture their strategic placement. The Caldwells weren't just trying to keep strays away. They were systematically killing them. A weak whimper drew his attention to a cluster of bushes. His heart sank as he recognized the mother dog from earlier. In the harsh beam of his flashlight, her condition looked even worse. Her breathing was labored, and a bluish tinge colored her gums. Classic signs of poison. "I'm so sorry, girl," Landon murmured, kneeling beside her. His veterinary training told him what he didn't want to accept. She was too far gone. The poison had done its work. Tears blurred his vision as he stroked her head, providing what comfort he could in her final moments. Sudden voices in the distance made Landon freeze. The beam of another flashlight swept across the field behind him, accompanied by the crunch of boots on gravel. "Check the south fence line again," a gruff voice called out. "Make sure none of them mongrels got through." Landon's pulse thundered in his ears. He quickly switched off his flashlight and pressed himself flat against the ground behind the bushes. The patrol's light passed within feet of his hiding spot, making his breath catch in his throat. "Found another dead one over here," a second voice announced. "Looks like the bait's working good. Working good." The casual satisfaction in the man's tone made Landon's blood boil. He wanted to jump up and confront them, but he forced himself to remain still. The evidence in his camera and the bagged poison sample were too important to risk losing. Minutes that felt like hours crawled by as Landon waited for the patrol to move on. His muscles cramped from holding still, and every insect crawling across his neck felt like approaching footsteps. Finally, the voices and flashlight beams retreated toward the main house. Landon waited 5 more agonizing minutes before daring to move. His hands shook as he double-checked his evidence. The photos were clear, and the poison sample was secure. But the weight of what he had discovered pressed down on him like a physical burden. As he carefully made his way back to the fence line, Landon's mind raced. This wasn't just about one mother dog anymore. The Caldwells had created a death trap for any stray animal unfortunate enough to wander onto their land. The systematic placement of the poison, the regular patrols. This was an organized operation. Just before reaching the fence, Landon heard an engine start up near the ranch house. He dropped to the ground again as headlights swept across the field. A truck was making one final patrol of the property. Heart pounding, Landon army crawled through the grass until he reached the fence. He waited for the truck to pass, then slipped through the gap he had used to enter. Only when he was several hundred yards away did he dare to stand up and brush himself off. Safe distance finally reached, Landon leaned against a tree, his legs weak with relief and residual fear. But overshadowing his physical reaction was a deep, burning anger. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photos he had taken. Irrefutable evidence of the Caldwells' cruel operation. The image of the dying mother dog, the victim of their calculated brutality, was seared into his mind. The question now was what to do with this evidence. The Caldwells were powerful in the community, and crossing them could have serious consequences. But as Landon clutched the bag containing the poisoned bait, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Something had to be done to stop this systematic slaughter of innocent animals. Sunlight streamed through Landon's kitchen window the next morning, but it did nothing to brighten his troubled mood. He sat at his small table, a cup of coffee growing cold between his hands as memories from the previous night haunted him. The evidence he'd gathered, photos on his phone, and a wrapped piece of poisoned bait lay before him like accusations. Z curled up at his feet, occasionally letting out soft whimpers that seemed to echo Landon's own distress. When their eyes met, Landon saw something in the pup's gaze that squeezed his heart. Trust, pure and simple, mixed with lingering fear. "What am I supposed to do, buddy?" Landon murmured, reaching down to scratch behind Z's ears. The small dog pressed closer, to his leg, trembling slightly. I know. It's not over, is it?" His first thought was to call the sheriff's office, but reality quickly dampened that idea. Sheriff Dale Caldwell, cousin to the ranch owners, had a reputation for protecting family interests. Landon had heard enough stories about complaints, mysteriously disappearing when they involved the Caldwells. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through local news articles about the Caldwell Ranch. Nothing negative ever seemed to stick to them. Every few months, someone would raise concerns about their practices, but the stories always faded away without resolution. Z's sudden bark startled him. The pup had moved to the window, hackles, raised as a truck with the Caldwell Ranch logo drove past on the main road. The sight made Landon's stomach clench. He could walk away from this, pretend he never saw anything. It would be safer that way. But then Z turned those soulful eyes back to him, and Landon remembered the dying mother dog, alone and suffering. How many others had met the same fate? How many more would follow if nobody spoke up? "You're right," he said softly to Z. "We can't just let this go." His thoughts turned to Carmen Holt. He'd helped her last year when she was investigating a case of neglected horses at a local stable. She'd been thorough, professional, and most importantly, fearless in pursuing the truth. If anyone would listen and know how to handle this properly, it would be her. Finding her number wasn't hard. She'd given him her card after the horse story, telling him to call if he ever came across another case worth investigating. His hands shook slightly as he dialed. "Carmen Holt, speaking," came the crisp response after 3 rings. "Ms. Holt, this is Landon Krell. We worked together on that horse neglect story last year." There was a pause, then recognition warmed her voice. "Landon, yes, of course. The vet assistant. What can I do for you?" He took a deep breath. "I found something concerning. It involves the Caldwell Ranch." The line went quiet for a moment. "The Caldwells? That's complicated territory. What exactly are we talking about?" Landon detailed his discoveries. The dying mother dog, the scattered poison, the systematic nature of it all. As he spoke, he could hear Carmen's occasional sharp intake of breath, the scratch of her pen against paper. "I have evidence," he added. "Photos. And I collected one of the poisoned baits." "You took quite a risk," Carmen said, her tone measured, but interested. "You know how the Caldwells respond to people poking around their business." "I know," Landon replied, watching Z curl up in a patch of sunlight. "But someone has to stop this. These animals, they're suffering, dying horrible deaths, and it's deliberate." Carmen was silent for so long that Landon worried the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke. "Meet me at the coffee corner in 1 hour. Bring what you have. I'm not making any promises, Landon, but I'll look at your evidence." Relief flooded through him. "Thank you, Ms. Holt." "Carmen," she corrected. "And don't thank me yet. The Caldwells have buried bigger stories than this. But," she paused, "sometimes the right story at the right time can make a difference." After hanging up, Landon looked down at Z, who wagged his tail hopefully. "Well, buddy, looks like we're taking a stand." The small dog's tail wagged harder, as if understanding the significance of the moment. He gathered his evidence carefully, making sure the photos were loaded on his tablet and the poison bait was securely wrapped. Each item felt weighted with responsibility, with the knowledge that he was choosing a path that could make him powerful enemies. But as he prepared to leave for the coffee shop, watching Z bounce excitedly at the prospect of a car ride, Landon knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes doing the right thing meant taking risks, meant standing up even when it would be easier and safer to look the other way. The time for silence was over. The Caldwells' cruel practices had gone unchecked for too long, and if no one else would speak up for these defenseless animals, then he would. With Carmen's help, maybe they could finally bring the truth to light. Landon sat at his kitchen table, staring at his cold coffee while Z curled up at his feet, letting out occasional whimpers that pierced Landon's heart. Every few minutes, the pup would lift his head and look toward the window as if sensing his mother's continued suffering. The morning sun cast long shadows across Landon's kitchen floor as he pulled out his phone and dialed Carmen Holt's number. He'd helped her last year when she wrote a story about an illegal puppy mill, and she'd always told him to call if he found anything newsworthy. "Carmen Holt speaking," came the sharp, professional voice on the other end. "Carmen, it's Landon Krell. I've got something you need to see. It's about the Caldwells." There was a pause on the line. "The Caldwells? That's not exactly a small target, Landon. What's this about?" "Can you meet me at Joe's Diner in 30 minutes? This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone." At Joe's Diner, they sat in a corner booth far from other customers. Carmen's dark eyes widened as Landon carefully laid out the evidence. The photos of the scattered poison bait, the wrapped sample he'd collected, and most damning of all, Pictures of the dying mother dog. I knew the Caldwells were rough characters, Carmen muttered, examining the photos on Landon's phone. But this is something else. She pulled out her notebook, her reporter's instincts clearly sparked. You know, this might connect to something bigger I've been investigating. Landon leaned forward. What do you mean? Carmen glanced around before lowering her voice. The Caldwells have been receiving massive agricultural subsidies for their ranch operations. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. But their reported livestock numbers don't add up. I've been trying to figure out where all that money's really going. She pulled out her tablet, showing Landon satellite images of the Caldwell property. See these areas here? They're supposed to be grazing land, but look at the discoloration. I've had environmental scientists look at these images. They think the Caldwells are illegally dumping chemical waste. Landon's stomach turned. The poison bait might be from the same chemicals they're dumping, Carmen finished. They're probably getting paid to dispose of industrial waste, doing it illegally, and pocketing both that money and the subsidies. The stray dogs were just unfortunate witnesses. Z whined softly from under the table where he lay at Landon's feet. The sound reminded Landon of the immediate crisis. The mother dog still suffering on Caldwell land. We need to save her, Landon said firmly. That mother dog, if we can get her out alive, get her tested, we'd have proof of what they're doing. Carmen nodded slowly. The chemical analysis of her blood work could tie directly to whatever they're dumping. But Landon, she grabbed his arm, this is dangerous. The Caldwells aren't just cruel, they're powerful. They've got connections throughout the county, even the sheriff's their cousin. I know, Landon said, watching Z's worried eyes. But I can't leave her there to die. And this isn't just about one dog anymore. How many other animals have they killed? How much damage have they done to the land? Someone has to stop them. Carmen studied him for a long moment. Okay, she finally said. I'll help. I've got contacts at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Agriculture. They've been looking for solid evidence of subsidy fraud. This could be it. She paused, tapping her pen against her notebook. But we need to be smart about this. First, we document everything. Then we get that mother dog out, safely and legally if possible. We need to do this right, or the Caldwells will just bury it like they've buried everything else. Landon felt the weight of what they were undertaking settle onto his shoulders. He thought about his quiet life, his simple job at the veterinary clinic, the peace of his small house on the edge of town. By challenging the Caldwells, he was risking all of that. But then Z pressed against his leg and Landon remembered the mother dog's eyes, filled with pain but still fighting to live. He thought about all the other animals that had probably died painful deaths on Caldwell land, about the poisoned earth and the corrupt system that allowed it all to happen. Whatever it takes, he said firmly. We have to expose this. Carmen nodded, already making notes and checking her contacts. I'll start making calls. We need to move fast, both to save that dog and before the Caldwells realize someone's onto them. As they planned their next moves, Landon felt a mix of fear and determination. He was no longer just a quiet vet assistant who'd found a stray puppy. He was about to take on one of the most powerful families in the county, and their corruption went deeper than he'd ever imagined. Z looked up at him with complete trust, and Landon silently promised both the pup and his suffering mother that he wouldn't let them down. The Caldwells had gotten away with their crimes for too long. It was time someone stood up to them, no matter the cost. The moon hung low and heavy in the night sky as Landon and Carmen crouched behind a cluster of scrub brush near the Caldwell Ranch fence line. Their hearts pounded in sync with the chirping of crickets, while a cool breeze rustled through the dry grass around them. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Carmen whispered, her dark hair pulled back tight under a black cap. She clutched her small camera close to her chest. Landon nodded, his throat too tight with tension to speak. He could feel sweat trickling down his back despite the night chill. Z was safely at home. He couldn't risk bringing the pup on such a dangerous mission. They waited until the security light at the far end of the property swept past before making their move. Landon led the way, his footsteps careful and measured as they crossed the boundary onto Caldwell land. Every snap of a twig made him freeze. Every distant sound caused his muscles to tense. "This way," he breathed, pointing toward the cluster of old equipment where he'd last seen the mother dog. The moonlight cast strange shadows across the rusted machinery, making ordinary shapes seem menacing. Carmen followed close behind, her breathing shallow and controlled. They wound their way through the maze of abandoned farm equipment, moving deeper into the property. The air grew thick with the metallic smell of old oil and decaying vegetation. There, Landon pointed to a gap between two ancient tractors. His heart clenched at the sight of the mother dog, still lying where he'd last seen her. She was barely moving, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. They approached slowly, trying not to startle the injured animal. The mother dog's eyes were glazed with pain, but she managed a weak thump of her tail when she recognized Landon's scent. "She's in really bad shape," Carmen murmured, snapping quick photos while Landon knelt beside the dog. "We need to move fast." Landon was just reaching for the blanket in his backpack when a sound made his blood run cold, the distant rumble of engines. Before he could react, brilliant light flooded the area as multiple vehicles roared to life. "They're coming," Carmen hissed, grabbing Landon's arm. The mother dog tried to stand but collapsed again with a whimper. Landon's hands shook as he tried to spread the blanket, knowing they had only seconds. Suddenly, a massive pickup truck came barreling through the equipment yard, its headlights cutting through the darkness like laser beams. The engine roared as it accelerated straight toward them. "Landon!" Carmen screamed. Pure instinct took over. Landon dove to the side, rolling hard across the packed earth as the truck thundered past, missing him by inches. The rush of air from its passage whipped dust and debris into his face. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering against his ribs. The mother dog lay trembling where he'd left her, her eyes wide with fear. Carmen was pressed against one of the tractors, her camera clutched to her chest. "We have to get her now!" Landon shouted over the noise of engines. More vehicles were converging on their position, their headlights creating a deadly web of light and shadow. He lunged forward, scooping up the mother dog as gently as he could. She was lighter than he expected, too light, speaking to how long she'd been suffering. Her body felt fragile in his arms, her breathing ragged against his chest. "This way!" Carmen called out, having spotted a gap in the approaching vehicles. They ran, ducking between equipment, the sounds of shouting men echoing behind them. The mother dog went limp in Landon's arms. "No, no, no," he pleaded, feeling her heartbeat growing fainter. "Stay with me, girl." "We can't help her if we're dead," Carmen panted, pulling at his sleeve. "We have to go now." Another truck roared to life nearby, its engine revving aggressively. Landon could hear the crunch of boots on gravel getting closer. With the mother dog cradled against him, he followed Carmen through the maze of equipment, every step a battle between speed and the need to keep the dog stable. They reached the property line just as flashlight beams cut through the darkness behind them. Carmen helped Landon climb through a gap in the fence, careful of his precious cargo. They didn't stop running until they reached Carmen's car, hidden a quarter mile. "Down an access road! Go, go!" Landon gasped as they piled in. The mother dog lay across his lap, her breathing shallow and irregular. Carmen gunned the engine, taking them away from the Caldwell ranch as fast as she dared without lights. Only when they were several miles away did Carmen flip on her headlights and let out a shaky breath. "That was too close," she said, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. "Way too close." Landon could only nod, still feeling the phantom rush of air from the truck that had nearly ended his life. He looked down at the mother dog, gently stroking her head. "We need to get her to the clinic," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's barely holding on." The mother dog lay trembling in Landon's arms as they huddled behind an old shed, her breathing shallow and labored. Despite their narrow escape, from the truck, Landon's heart sank as he recognized the telltale signs of poisoning, the same symptoms he'd seen too many times at the veterinary clinic. "She's fading fast," he whispered, his voice cracking. His hands shook as he gently stroked her matted fur. The dog's eyes, so much like Z's, looked up at him with a mixture of trust and pain that tore at his soul. Carmen knelt beside them, her camera forgotten at her side. "Can we get her to the clinic?" she asked softly, though the look on her face suggested she already knew the answer. "It's too late," Landon replied, his throat tight. "The poison's been in her system too long." He could feel the dog's heartbeat growing weaker beneath his fingers. Each breath seemed to require more effort than the last. The mother dog let out a soft whimper, her body tensing. Landon held her closer, trying to provide what comfort he could in her final moments. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry we couldn't save you." Tears rolled down his cheeks as the dog's breathing grew more labored. With one final, shuddering breath, the mother dog went still in his arms. Landon bent his head, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. All he could think about was Z waiting at home, now truly an orphan, the tiny pup who had led him here, trying so desperately to save his mother. Carmen placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Landon," she said softly, "we need to move. It's not safe here." But Landon couldn't move yet. Rage began to build inside him, mixing with his grief. The Caldwells had done this deliberately, scattered poison across their land with the explicit purpose of killing innocent animals. This wasn't just negligence or cruelty. This was calculated extermination. "They won't stop," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "They'll keep doing this until every stray animal within miles is dead." He looked up at Carmen, his eyes hard despite the tears. "We have to stop them. Not just expose them. Stop them." Carmen nodded solemnly. "We will." She pulled out her phone and quickly took several photos of the deceased dog, documenting the evidence. "Everything we've gathered matters. The poisoned, bait samples, the photos of their operation, and now this." She paused, meeting his gaze. "But we have to be smart about this. They've already shown they're willing to run us down with a truck." Landon carefully laid the mother dog's body down, arranging her legs as if she were merely sleeping. He stood up slowly, his joints stiff from crouching. "This isn't just about exposing animal cruelty anymore," he said. "It's about everything. The corrupt sheriff, the illegal dumping, the fraudulent subsidies. They're poisoning more than just animals. They're poisoning this whole community. And we're going to prove it," Carmen assured him, her voice firm with conviction. "But we need to get out of here now." As they made their way back through the darkness, Landon's mind was racing. Every step away from that shed felt like a step toward something bigger than himself. He thought about Z at home, probably curled up in his favorite corner, waiting for his return. The pup had survived against all odds, and now Landon understood why. Z wasn't just a dog he'd rescued. He was living proof of the Caldwells' cruelty and a symbol of resistance against their corruption. "I should have done something sooner," Landon murmured as they reached Carmen's car, parked well away from the ranch. "Maybe if I'd acted faster?" "Don't," Carmen cut him off firmly. "You can't think that way. What matters is what we do now." She unlocked the car and turned to face him. "The evidence we've gathered is solid. We just need to find the right way to use it." Landon nodded, his jaw set with determination. This wasn't the end, it was a beginning. The death of Z's mother had changed something fundamental inside him. What had started as an attempt to save one dog had transformed into a mission for justice, not just for the animals, but for everyone affected by the Caldwell's corruption. As they drove away from the ranch, Landon's grief began to crystallize into resolve. He wasn't just trying to rescue animals anymore. He was fighting to change a system that had allowed this cruelty to flourish. The weight of the mother dog's death pressed heavy on his heart, but it also fueled a determination that he knew would carry him through whatever came next. Carmen seemed to sense his thoughts. "We'll make them answer for this, Landon," she said, quietly. "All of it." He nodded, thinking of Z waiting at home, the last survivor of his family saved by chance and compassion. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady despite his earlier tears. "We will." The mother dog's final breaths came in soft, painful whimpers. Landon cradled her closer, tears streaming down his face as her body went still. The weight of failure crushed him, knowing he'd been too late to save her. "I'm so sorry," Carmen whispered, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We need to go. It's not safe here." Landon nodded numbly, carefully wrapping the dog's body in his jacket. They couldn't leave her here, not on Caldwell land. She deserved better than that. The drive back to town passed in heavy silence. Landon's mind raced with images of other animals that might be suffering the same fate. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice firm despite his tears. "We have to stop them." At his apartment, after laying the mother dog to rest in his small backyard, Landon sat at his kitchen table with Carmen, both nursing cups of coffee that had gone cold. Z curled up at his feet, whimpering softly, as if sensing the loss of his mother. A knock at the door made them both jump. Carmen reached for her phone, ready to call for help, while Landon approached cautiously. Through the peephole, he saw a man he recognized from news coverage of the Caldwell family. Rhett Caldwell, the younger son who'd disappeared from public view years ago. "I know you were there tonight," Rhett called through the door, his voice low and urgent. "Please, I want to help." Landon exchanged a wary look with Carmen before cracking open the door, chain still in place. "Why should I trust you?" Rhett's face showed genuine distress. "Because I've been trying to find a way to stop them for years. I saw what happened tonight. I'm done being a coward." After a tense moment of consideration, Landon let him in. Rhett's simple clothes and weathered appearance were a far cry from the polished Caldwell image. He stood awkwardly in the small living room, hands shoved in his pockets. "I left the family 3 years ago," Rhett explained, his voice heavy with old pain. "Couldn't stomach what my father was doing anymore. The poisoned bait, the illegal dumping. It's just the tip of the iceberg." Carmen leaned forward, journalist instincts kicking in. "What else do you know?" "Everything," Rhett said, dropping into a chair. "The fake environmental reports, the bribes to inspectors, where they hide the evidence during audits. I know it all, and I'm willing to testify." Landon studied him carefully. "Why now?" "Because watching that dog die tonight," Rhett's voice cracked. "It brought back everything I've been trying to forget. Every animal I watched suffer while I did nothing. I heard about the inspection hearing next week. It's our chance to finally bring them down." Carmen pulled out her notebook. "The hearing's usually just a formality. The Caldwells always pass." "Because they know exactly when and where the inspectors will look," Rhett explained. "I can tell you their whole routine, where they hide the worst evidence, which officials are in their pocket." Landon felt a spark of hope for the first time since holding the dying dog. "With your testimony and our evidence, we could finally expose everything," Carmen finished, her eyes bright with possibility. They spent the next hours planning Rhett, revealing detail after damning detail about the Caldwell operation. His insider knowledge filled gaps in their investigation, transforming scattered evidence into a solid case. "They'll try to discredit me," Rhett warned. "Paint me as the bitter son out for revenge." "That's why we need everything documented," Carmen said. "Photos, records, witnesses, anything that supports your testimony." Landon watched Z sleeping peacefully, remembering his mother's trust in those final moments. "We'll need to move fast. The hearing's in 7 days." "I have access to the ranch's computer systems," Rhett offered. "Financial records, emails, proof of everything I'm telling you. But getting it will be dangerous." "We're past the point of playing it safe," Landon replied, his resolve hardening. "That dog died in my arms tonight. How many more will suffer if we don't stop this?" They worked until dawn, plotting every detail. Rhett's knowledge gave them a fighting chance, but the risk was enormous. One wrong move could alert the Caldwells and destroy their opportunity. As the sun rose, Rhett stood to leave. "I should go, before anyone notices I'm missing. But I need you to know, I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it because it's right." Landon nodded, understanding. "We'll be careful with the information. Make sure it counts." After Rhett left, Carmen gathered her notes. "This changes everything," she said. "With Rhett's help, we might actually win." "We have to," Landon replied, scratching Z's ears. "For every animal they've hurt, for every law they've broken. No more looking the other way." The weight of their task settled over them, but now it felt manageable. With Rhett's testimony and their evidence, they had a real chance to bring the Caldwells to justice. The coming days would be dangerous, but for the first time since finding Z, Landon felt the balance of power shifting. Landon's hands trembled slightly as he sealed the thick manila envelope. Inside lay weeks of meticulous documentation. Photographs of the poisoned bait, soil samples showing chemical contamination, financial records revealing fraudulent subsidies, and most importantly, Rhett's sworn testimony. Carmen had helped organize everything into a compelling narrative that even the most disinterested inspector couldn't ignore. "Are you sure about this?" Carmen asked, touching his arm gently. Her eyes held both concern and determination. "It has to be anonymous," Landon replied, double-checking the envelope's contents one final time. "If they trace it back to us before the inspection, the Caldwells will bury everything." They had chosen to mail the evidence to 3 different state inspectors, ensuring at least one package would make it through. Carmen's journalism contacts had identified which officials weren't in the Caldwell's pocket. Z watched from his bed. In the corner, his head tilted as if understanding the gravity of the moment. The small dog had grown stronger in the weeks since his mother's death, though the sadness in his eyes remained. At the post office, Landon's heart pounded as he dropped each envelope into the mail slot. The soft thud of each package hitting the bottom felt like a small victory. Carmen stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his, offering silent support. "Now we wait," she said softly as they walked back to the car. The next few days passed in, a strange blur of tension and hope. Landon found himself doing something he hadn't done in weeks, making plans. Simple things like taking Z to the dog park without constantly looking over his shoulder. Maybe even asking Carmen to dinner somewhere nice, acknowledging the growing warmth between them that had nothing to do with their investigation. One evening, as they sat on his porch watching Z chase fireflies in the yard, Carmen reached for his hand. "You did something brave," she said. "Whatever happens next, remember that." Landon squeezed her hand, allowing himself to feel the first real moments of peace since finding Z's mother. The spring air was soft and sweet, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. For just a moment, he could imagine a future where justice prevailed, where the powerful didn't always win. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, watching Z's playful antics. "Maybe after all this is over, we could—" Carmen turned toward him, her eyes bright with understanding. "Maybe we could," she replied softly. The moment felt perfect, until Z suddenly stopped playing and stood alert, his ears pricked forward. The small dog's body tensed, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Landon's hard-won peace evaporated instantly. He knew that look. It was the same way Z had reacted when leading him to his dying mother, the same instinct that had warned them of danger on the Caldwell property. Carmen must have felt him stiffen because she sat up straighter, her journalist's instincts kicking in. "What is it?" "Something's wrong," Landon said, his voice tight. "Z knows." As if confirming his words, distant car engines growled in the darkness beyond his property. Z's growl deepened, and he backed toward the porch, placing himself protectively in front of Landon and Carmen. The brief, beautiful moment of hope shattered like glass. Landon could feel it slipping away, the dream of justice, of peace, of a future without fear. Whatever was coming, he knew their carefully constructed plan was about to unravel. The headlights hadn't appeared yet, but their glow was growing brighter. Z's warning had given them precious seconds, but Landon could already feel the weight of dread settling back onto his shoulders. Their fleeting victory, their moment of imagined triumph, was ending before it had truly begun. The acrid smell of smoke jolted Landon awake at 3:15 in the morning. For a moment he lay confused in his bed until the distinctive crackling sound registered in his mind. His eyes snapped open to see orange flames licking up his bedroom wall. "Z!" he screamed, leaping from his bed. Thick smoke filled the hallway as he stumbled toward the living room where Z usually slept in his bed near the couch. The heat was intense, making his eyes water as he dropped to his hands and knees. Through the dense smoke, he could hear Z's terrified whimpers coming from the corner of the living room. The small dog had wedged himself behind the couch, paralyzed with fear. "Come here, boy," Landon called out desperately, his voice rough from the smoke. A loud crack overhead made him look up. The ceiling beam was starting to give way, showering sparks and burning debris around him. The flames had already engulfed most of the front door, leaving them trapped. Landon crawled toward the couch, his lungs burning with every breath. "Z, please!" he begged, reaching out toward the frightened pup. Finally, Z darted out from his hiding place, but instead of coming to Landon, he ran toward the kitchen in panic. Landon's heart nearly stopped as another beam crashed down between them, sending up a wall of flames. Without thinking about his own safety, Landon leaped through the flames after Z. The heat seared his back and arms, but he ignored the pain. He found Z cornered in the kitchen, the flames advancing rapidly from both doorways. "I've got you," Landon whispered, scooping up the trembling dog. He looked frantically around the smoke-filled kitchen, spotting their only chance, the small window above the sink. With Z tucked securely against his chest, Landon climbed onto the counter. The window was stuck, swollen from the heat. He slammed his elbow against it once, twice, finally breaking through on the third try. Glass cut into his arm as he pushed the remaining shards away. The window was barely big enough for them to squeeze through. Landon pushed Z out first, watching as the small dog landed safely in the grass below. Just as he started to pull himself through, there was a deafening crash behind him. The kitchen ceiling collapsed, sending a blast of heat and debris that knocked him halfway out the window. Landon felt the glass cutting deeper into his stomach as he dangled there, but with one final push he tumbled out onto the ground. He grabbed Z and scrambled away from the house, watching in horror as the flames consumed everything he owned. His legs gave out and he fell to his knees in the damp grass. The cold night air burned his smoke-filled lungs as he coughed violently. Through watering eyes, he watched his small home become an inferno. Everything was gone. His clothes, his photographs, his veterinary textbooks, every possession he'd worked so hard to acquire. Z pressed against his leg, shivering. Landon looked down at his faithful companion, noting the singed fur but relieved. To see no serious injuries. His own arms were covered in angry red burns, and blood trickled from the cuts on his forearm and abdomen. As distant sirens wailed, Landon felt a crushing wave of despair. The Caldwells had taken everything from him now. His security, his home, nearly his life and Z's. He'd been naive to think he could fight them, to believe that justice would prevail against their money and power. Yet as Z looked up at him, with those trusting eyes, something stirred in Landon's chest. This small dog had survived against impossible odds, first losing his mother to the Caldwell's poison, and now this fire. If Z could keep fighting, so could he. Landon pulled Z, closer, ignoring the pain from his burns. "We're not done," he whispered, his voice hoarse from smoke but filled with determination. "We're still here, and as long as we're breathing, we're going to keep fighting." 3 days after the fire, Landon stood in borrowed clothes outside the county inspection chamber, his burned arms still wrapped in bandages. Carmen squeezed his hand reassuringly, while Z sat alert at his feet, wearing a new service dog vest that would allow him into the hearing. "You ready?" Rhett Caldwell asked quietly, adjusting his tie. The younger Caldwell son looked pale, but determined, his testimony folder clutched tightly in his hands. Landon nodded, taking a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They entered the chamber to find it already packed. The Caldwell family occupied the front row, their expensive suits and cold stares a stark contrast to Landon's humble appearance. James Caldwell, the family patriarch, shot his son Rhett a look of pure venom before turning to whisper to his lawyer. As they took their seats, 2 burly men Landon recognized as Caldwell ranch hands deliberately bumped his injured shoulder. Carmen started to protest, but Landon shook his head. "Not now," he whispered. "They're trying to provoke us." The state inspectors filed in, 5 stern-faced individuals who would determine the fate of the Caldwell empire. The head inspector, Ms. Martinez, called the hearing to order. "We're here to investigate serious allegations regarding the Caldwell Agricultural Corporation's practices and compliance with state regulations." For the next hour, Landon presented his evidence. His voice grew stronger as he described finding Z's dying mother, the scattered poison baits, and the systematic cruelty he'd uncovered. When he mentioned the fire that destroyed his home, several inspectors leaned forward, their expressions darkening. "And you have proof these actions were deliberate?" Ms. Martinez asked. Landon gestured to Z, who sat perfectly composed beside him. "This puppy is living proof. His mother died in my arms, poisoned on Caldwell land. I have photographs, samples of the poison bait, and something even more compelling." He nodded to Rhett, who stood up. James Caldwell's face turned purple. "You ungrateful little order!" Ms. Martinez snapped, silencing him. Rhett's testimony was devastating. He detailed years of illegal practices, from toxic chemical dumping to fraudulent subsidy claims. His voice shook, but grew stronger as he described how his father had ordered the systematic poisoning of strays to maintain a pristine property image for investors. "We have documentation," Rhett said, sliding folders across the table. "Bank records, purchase orders for the poison, everything." James Caldwell suddenly lunged to his feet. "You treacherous snake!" he roared at his son. "I'll destroy you for this!" He charged forward, but 2 security officers intercepted him before he could reach Rhett. The chamber erupted in chaos. Z barked sharply, positioning himself protectively in front of Landon. As the officers struggled with the elder Caldwell, more evidence spilled from his lawyer's briefcase. Incriminating documents they'd planned to destroy. "Remove Mr. Caldwell," Ms. Martinez ordered. The officers dragged him toward the door, his face contorted with rage as he shouted threats at his son and Landon. The hearing concluded swiftly after that. The inspection board's decision was unanimous. The Caldwell Corporation would lose its operating licenses and face multiple criminal investigations. Their vast land holdings would be seized pending legal proceedings. As they left the chamber, Carmen grabbed Landon's hand. "You did it," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride. People stopped them in the hallway, reporters, other ranchers, even former Caldwell employees coming forward with their own stories. Landon, who had lived so quietly on the edges of their community, found himself suddenly at its center, recognized for his courage in standing up to corruption. Outside in the bright sunshine, Landon knelt to ruffle Z's ears. "We both survived," he said softly. "More than that, we won." Carmen helped him up, her hand lingering on his arm. "Where will you go now?" "Your house." "I was thinking of starting fresh," Landon said. "Maybe opening my own veterinary practice, focusing on rescued animals." He looked at her hopefully. "I could use a partner who knows how to tell a good story." She smiled, threading, her fingers through his. "I think that could be arranged." They walked to Carmen's car, Z trotting happily beside them. As they drove away from the courthouse, Landon watched the Caldwell empire receding in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, he felt truly free. With Z's head resting on his lap and Carmen's hand occasionally finding his, Landon embraced the promise of their new beginning, one built on the foundations of loyalty, justice, and love. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stay, subscribe, and I'll be here again tomorrow with another quiet story full of the kind of love that lasts.